The first thing I remember is the sound. A deep, mechanical hum vibrating through the concrete. The flicker of fluorescent lights that turned the hallway into a tunnel of sterile white. My name is Dr. Andrew Collins, and that night, my first night as a prison doctor, changed everything I believed about life and death. I had walked into Red Ridge Correctional Facility expecting the usual chaos of a prison infirmary. Fights, infections, overdoses. Instead, I stepped into something that science still refuses to name. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills of rural Tennessee, and rain drummed against the high metal fences. Inside, the air felt heavier, almost electric. The guards escorted me through security with the indifference of men who had seen too much. "You'll get used to it," one said, swiping his keycard through the gate. The steel doors slammed shut behind me. The sound lingered, sharp and final. By 8:40 p.m., I'd finished introducing myself to the night nurse, reviewing the patient logs, trying to calm the nerves that came with every new job. Then the intercom crackled to life. Disturbance in cell block D. A voice shouted through static, "Medical, we need you down here, now." I grabbed my bag and followed two guards down the corridor. The air grew colder as we descended. Every echo felt amplified, every shadow too still. When we reached the cell, the noise stopped. Inside, an inmate sat rigid on his bunk, staring straight ahead. "That's Reeves," one guard muttered. "Been yelling for the last 10 minutes that something's inside him." Michael Reeves. Inmate 4829, 42 years old. His file had listed hypertension and anxiety, nothing else unusual. But the man I saw looked empty. His skin was pale, slick with sweat, and his pupils were blown wide as if he'd been drugged. "What's wrong, Michael?" I asked quietly, stepping closer. He looked at me, eyes unfocused. "It's my heart," he whispered. It stopped again. It was trying to crawl out. At first, I thought it was panic. I checked his pulse, strong, steady. I signaled the guard to hold him still while I listened to his chest. Normal rhythm, normal breathing. Nothing to explain the terror in his voice. Then the heart monitor flickered. His pulse dropped from 72 to 30. I froze. Michael, stay with me." The line spiked erratically, jumping, falling, jumping again. He gasped, back arching off the bunk, hands clawing at his chest. The guard stepped back, shouting for help. I grabbed my stethoscope again. Nothing. Silence. His pupils fixed. The monitor flatlined. I called for the crash cart. We lifted him to the floor. I rubbed the defibrillator pads together, the smell of ozone filling the room. And then, everything changed. Before I could press the paddles to his chest, the monitor beeped once. Then again. The flat line disappeared. His heart, without any intervention, had started beating on its own. The guards stared at me, confused. "What the hell just happened?" one whispered. Reeves slowly turned his head toward me. "Told you," he said faintly. "It's trying to crawl out." I stood, frozen, the adrenaline still surging. It wasn't a faint. It wasn't a seizure. I'd seen cardiac arrests before, but never one that reversed itself without defibrillation, without CPR, without anything at all. That was the first night. The night I realized Red Ridge held secrets that medicine couldn't chart. Dr. Collins' voice softens in reflection. "I thought I was ready for anything. I was wrong. They told me Red Ridge was built in the 1950s, back when isolation was still considered rehabilitation. The walls were 12 inches thick, the windows barred and narrow. From the outside, it looked like a concrete fortress buried in the hills. Inside, it felt like the building itself was alive, breathing, listening, remembering. After that first night, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. The rational part of my mind clung to explanations. A cardiac arrhythmia, a seizure disorder, a temporary loss of consciousness. Anything but what it looked like. A man whose heart had simply decided to stop and then, impossibly, start again. I began asking questions. The nurses had their own theories, most of them whispered after lights out. They told me strange things happened in Red Ridge's medical wing. Machines malfunctioned without reason. Heart monitors flatlined, then blinked back to life. One nurse, a veteran of 20 years, leaned in and said quietly, "This place remembers every death. Maybe some just don't stick." I dismissed it as superstition. But when I opened Reeves's medical file, the unease returned. Michael Reeves, 42 years old, serving a life sentence for armed robbery and manslaughter. No known family. No significant medical history. Yet his file contained dozens of incident reports, complaints of dizziness, sudden fainting, and a repeated phrase scrawled in his own handwriting. "I lose time." He told multiple physicians that he could feel his heart stop, that the world dimmed for a few seconds each day before starting again. The notes from those doctors were cold, clinical, no objective evidence. Patient displays anxiety with somatic focus. Translation. He was making it up, but the more I read, the more something felt wrong. One entry from 2 years prior caught my eye. Subject claims to experience total awareness during cardiac pause. Reports sound of ticking clock and sensation of being watched. I visited cell block D the next morning. Reeves was sketching on the back of a meal tray, mechanical hearts, veins drawn like clock springs. He looked up at me through the bars and asked, Did you hear it too? What did I hear? I asked. The ticking, he said. When it stops, that's when I go away. His calmness unsettled me more than his words. He wasn't delusional, not in the usual sense. He was describing something he believed to be real. I spoke with the guards, who'd known him longest. One said Reeves avoided mirrors, as if afraid of what he might see in them. Another swore that during night shifts they'd hear him whispering numbers in his sleep, counting down over and over until he reached 0. Still, every test on record came back normal. No brain abnormalities, no heart defects, no trauma. Just a man convinced that his heart occasionally forgot to live. That's when I began to understand. This wasn't just a medical mystery. It was a story buried inside those concrete walls, a secret that Redridge had been holding for years. For the next 72 hours, I kept Michael Reeves under continuous observation in the prison infirmary. I told the staff it was for cardiac monitoring, but the truth was, I needed to see it again with my own eyes. I needed to prove, to myself more than anyone else, that what I'd witnessed wasn't some trick of perception. The first night passed without incident. His vital signs remained stable, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor echoing softly through the dimly lit room. But Reeves barely slept. He sat upright for hours, staring at the heart rate line as if it were a mirror showing him something only he could see. It'll happen soon, he murmured. You'll believe me then. On the second night, around 3 a.m., it did. The monitor beeped in its steady pattern, then faltered. The heart rate number began to dip. 62, 55, 48, 36. I leaned in, eyes locked on the display. The line flattened. Total asystole. No heartbeat. Yet Reeves's eyes were open. He wasn't seizing. He wasn't gasping. He was awake. Michael, I said quietly, can you hear me? He nodded faintly. It's happening again. I'm crossing over. The nurses froze. I motioned for them to keep still, to document everything. I checked his carotid artery. Nothing. His pulse was gone, skin already cooling. And still, he whispered. It's a red room this time, he said slowly. There's a clock on the wall. I can hear it. Ticking. After 15 seconds, the monitor beeped again. His heart restarted on its own. Blood pressure returned to normal. Reeves blinked, then smiled weakly. See? I told you. It's not dying. It's visiting. I sat back, stunned. A conscious man with no pulse. No oxygen deprivation. No syncope. Nothing in any medical textbook could explain it. We ran every test imaginable. Blood work, electrolytes, ECG, EEG, imaging scans. All normal. I even consulted a cardiologist over the phone, describing the event without naming where it happened. He told me it was physiologically impossible. Either the monitor malfunctioned, he said, or you misread the data. But I hadn't. Later that day, I interviewed Reeves again, hoping to capture more detail. He spoke in a flat tone as if describing a place he'd visited countless times. It's like the world turns off, he said. No pain, no air, no sound. Just the clock. And a voice, faint but close, telling me to come back when it stops. I asked him whose voice it was. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. A doctor's, he said softly, but not you. Every night after that, his episodes grew longer, 15 seconds, then 20, then 30. His body temperature would drop slightly, his pupils constricted, and each time he'd describe more vivid scenes, corridors made of red light, the ticking clock always overhead, and the sense that someone, or something, was standing behind him. I began to dread the sound of the monitor. Every pause felt like an invitation into the unknown. In my clinical notes, I wrote a single line that I still remember to this day. If the patient's subjective experience is real, then the line between consciousness and death may not be as defined as we think. That thought would haunt me long after I left Redridge. I spent the next several days chasing an explanation that refused to exist. Every medical instinct told me there had to be a reason, something measurable, something visible under a microscope or on a scan, but every test came back clean. Reeves's brain showed no signs of oxygen deprivation. His heart structure was perfectly normal. If he had been in a modern hospital, I would have ordered a genetic panel, a tilt table test, maybe even an implantable loop recorder. But in a prison infirmary, all I had were old machines, half-functioning monitors, and my own disbelief. I began calling in favors. Former colleagues from residency, a neurologist I'd trained with, a psychiatrist friend who specialized in dissociative disorders. Each time I told this story, I could hear the same hesitation in their voices. They didn't want to say it out loud, but they all thought the same thing. You're being manipulated. The patient is faking it. So I invited one of them, a cardiologist, to review the telemetry remotely. After an hour of silence, he called me back. If this data is real, he said, then you're recording spontaneous asystole with maintained EEG activity. That shouldn't be possible. His voice lowered. Andrew, are you sure your machines aren't haunted? He was joking, but the word stuck in my head. Haunted. Meanwhile, Reeves's episodes were changing. The pauses were lasting longer, 40, sometimes 50 seconds. He described new sensations, cold wind, whispers urging him to come back slower. I recorded his accounts word for word, though I knew no medical journal would ever publish them. Nurses began noticing strange coincidences. Heart monitors across the infirmary flickered seconds before Reeves' vitals dropped, as if his body could somehow influence the machines around him. One night, the power cut out for exactly 20 seconds, the same length as his cardiac pause. When the lights returned, he was smiling faintly, whispering, "See? Time waits for me." The staff grew uneasy. Some refused to work the night shift when he was admitted. They said the air felt colder in his room, that the ticking from the hallway clock would stop whenever his heartbeat did. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the science, but even I started waking up in the middle of the night to phantom beeps, like a monitor sounding from somewhere deep inside my mind. Then came the drawing. One morning, I found a folded paper left on my desk. Reeves's name was on the corner. Inside was a sketch, detailed meticulous. It showed the prison from above, its corridors twisting together like arteries, every cell connected by thin lines to a large heart drawn in the center. When I asked him what it meant, he said, "That's how it feels. Like the building's alive, and I'm its pulse. Every time I stop, it stops too." I laughed at the metaphor, but my hands were trembling. That night, I received a call from a guard. "Doc," he said, his voice shaking. We found Reeves sitting up in bed. No pulse, 4 minutes flatline. Then he looked at me and said, "You were there too." The guard swore it happened exactly at 3:17 a.m. And that was when I began to believe him. It was raining again that night. The same hard, relentless storm that had battered the prison on my first shift months earlier. The power flickered in its usual rhythm, the hallways humming like a living thing. I was reviewing patient charts in my office when the intercom crackled to life. "Medical to infirmary. Urgent. It's Reeves." Something in the guard's voice told me this time was different. When I arrived, Michael Reeves was already awake, sitting upright in his cot. His eyes followed me the moment I stepped into the room. "It's happening one last time," he said quietly. "You should be here for it." His calmness chilled me. Normally, before his episodes, he trembled or panicked. But now he seemed almost at peace. I glanced at the monitors, heart rate steady at 70, oxygen levels perfect. Still, every instinct told me the storm outside wasn't the only thing building. I tried to stall, to distract him. "Michael, listen to me. Whatever this is, we can control it. Let me adjust the medications, maybe." He shook his head. "No, you can't fix it. The clock's almost done." A flash of lightning illuminated the room, throwing our shadows across the walls. The power flickered again. The monitor screens dimmed for half a second, then came back online. His pulse began to fall. 50, 40, 30. "Michael?" I leaned closer. Stay with me." He exhaled slowly, eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "I see it," he whispered. "The red light? The clock. And you're there, doctor, just like before." The monitor flatlined. I called the code immediately. "I get the crash cart, now." The guards cleared the room as my team rushed in. We attached the defibrillator pads, began chest compressions. One nurse counted out loud. 1, 2, 3. But then I noticed something impossible. The EEG screen still showed activity, sharp, coherent waves. His brain was still working. "He's conscious," I said under my breath. "He's conscious without a heartbeat." The nurse froze. "What do we do?" "Keep going." Minutes passed. Sweat dripped down my face. Every training, every medical instinct screamed that the man in front of me was gone. But the lines on that EEG were telling another story. 6 minutes. No pulse, no respiration. But his brain was alive. Then, without warning, Reeves gasped. A single rattling breath that cut through the chaos. His eyes opened halfway. He looked right at me. "You'll understand when it happens to you," he whispered. And then he was gone. This time the line on the EEG went still. His heart, his brain, everything flatlined together. We continued compressions for another 10 minutes, but I knew it was over. When I finally stepped back, I realized how quiet the room had become. The storm had stopped. Even the guards stood silent, as if afraid to breathe. The clock on the wall ticked once. Then it stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. I reached over and turned off the monitor. The room filled with a low mechanical hum, the same sound I'd heard on my first night, the same sound that now seemed to echo somewhere far deeper. I signed the death certificate myself. Time of death, 3:17 a.m. As I removed my gloves, I thought I heard something faint, like the tick of a clock fading down the hallway. I told myself it was my imagination, but when I looked back at the bed, I could have sworn the lines on the monitor screen trembled once more, before going black. That was the night Michael Reeves died, and the night something inside me began to unravel. The days that followed were unlike anything I'd ever experienced in medicine. Red Ridge resumed its rhythm as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Paperwork was filed. Reports were written. The official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. Case closed. But to me, it was anything but. They called me into a board review, a sterile room with flickering fluorescent lights and the faint smell of bleach. 3 administrators and the prison warden sat across from me, their expressions neutral, clinical. "Dr. Collins," one of them began, "we appreciate your thorough documentation. However, some of your notes seem unconventional. They were referring to the EEG data, to the 6 minutes of persistent brain activity with no pulse, to my descriptions of Reeves's conscious awareness during a systole. It's scientifically impossible, the chief medical officer said flatly. You must have misread the equipment. But I hadn't. I knew what I saw. I knew what I'd heard. The beeping, the red light, the words. You'll understand when it happens to you. When I tried to explain, I could hear the impatience in their voices. Andrew, this is a correctional facility, not a research hospital. Write your report, close the file, and move on. But I couldn't. Something in me refused to let it go. That night, long after everyone else had left, I went back to the infirmary alone. I powered up the EEG machine and replayed the final recording. The waveform appeared, small rhythmic oscillations that repeated every 1.3 seconds. At first, I thought it was interference, but when I zoomed in, the pattern wasn't random. It pulsed like a code, short, long, almost like Morse. I pulled out the sketches Reeves had left behind. In one of them, the clock drawing, the hands were set at 3:17, the same time he died. The same time his brainwaves had continued long after his heart stopped. I laid the EEG printout beside it, tracing the lines with my finger. The arcs of the wave matched the curvature of the clock hands perfectly. It wasn't coincidence. In the following weeks, I reached out to medical contacts again, cautiously sharing fragments of data. One neurologist, after reviewing the EEG file, wrote back, "This looks patterned. Are you sure this wasn't an intentional signal?" That word, signal, lodged in my mind. If it was, who or what was sending it? Months later, I tracked down a distant cousin of Reeves, a woman living in Kentucky. When I explained who I was, she fell silent for a long time before saying, "It runs in the family. My father, my brother, they all had spells where their hearts stopped. Doctors never figured it out. Every man in her family, she said, had died before turning 45. The condition was unnamed, undocumented. Maybe genetic, maybe not. Sometimes, late at night, I still stare at that EEG trace, those repeating waves frozen in time. I tell myself they were just electrical noise, nothing more. But deep down, I know better. What if consciousness doesn't end when the heart stops? What if it simply moves? Somewhere else? It's been 13 years since that night at Red Ridge. The rain still makes me uneasy. So does the hum of fluorescent lights and the sterile tick of hospital clocks. I left prison medicine soon after Michael Reeves died. Officially, I told colleagues I was burned out, that I needed to move into private practice. The truth is harder to explain. I simply couldn't walk those corridors again without feeling like something unseen was following me. People like to say time heals everything. But time, I've learned, isn't always moving forward. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it stops. Every night at exactly 3:17 a.m., I wake up. No alarm, no noise, just the sensation that someone has called my name. I lie there in the dark, listening. That's when I hear it. Faint, steady, unmistakable. The soft beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. It always fades before I can tell if it's real. I've tried to rationalize it. Stress, sleep disturbance, maybe my subconscious clinging to the trauma. But part of me wonders, what if it isn't memory at all? What if it's a signal? I still have one thing from those days. A single sheet of paper, folded and worn, kept in the bottom drawer of my desk. It's the last sketch Reeves gave me, the one of the prison drawn like a living heart. I used to look at it clinically, trying to decode its meaning. Now I see it differently. Every corridor, every barred cell, arteries feeding a pulse that wasn't just his. Maybe Red Ridge itself was alive. Maybe it still is. Sometimes, under the dim light of my office, I swear the clock in the drawing moves. The hands inch forward, then stop at 3:17. Always 3:17. I've been asked to give lectures about the case over the years. Students love a mystery, especially one that dances between medicine and the unknown. I tell them the facts, that an inmate's heart stopped repeatedly while he remained conscious, that no science could explain it, and that it ended with 6 minutes of brain activity after cardiac death. But what I don't tell them is the rest, that sometimes, when I speak about Reeves, the projector light in the lecture hall flickers, the same flicker that haunted the infirmary. People think doctors have answers. We don't. We have data, instruments, charts. But no matter how much we learn, death still holds the final secret. I used to think we could read that secret if we just looked closely enough. Now I know better. We only see the faintest reflection of it, like light bending through water. If I close my eyes, I can still hear him. You'll understand when it happens to you. Maybe one day. I will. Until then, every night when the clock strikes 3:17, I listen for that fading heartbeat. Because once you've heard the sound of a man's heart stopping while he's still awake, you never truly stop hearing it. We doctors like to believe we understand life and death. But that night, I learned we only read the charts. We don't write them. The heartbeat echoes one last time, steady, slowing, then silent.